inspire thousands. Some people, no matter how hard they work, will never truly be given.
There are 8 to 10 kids that are looking for them every single week, and it's an important job. And, we kind of put the ministry for the lives of those children in the hands of our small group leaders.
Welcome to the Vanderbloemen Leadership Podcast, where we talk about how to build, run, and keep a great team. I'm your host, Holly Tate. I am so excited about today's episode. It's a little different. Milan Ford is hosting today's interview. Milan is one of our executive search consultants here at Vanderbloemen Search Group. He consults with churches all across the country. And today, he's interviewing Kendra Fleming, who's the director of children's ministry at North Point Ministries in Alpharetta, Georgia. I'm sure you've heard of North Point, Andy Stanley's church. They're doing amazing things. And Milan asks Kendra how she's built and run the children's ministry there. So be sure to tweet your takeaways using the hashtag Vandercast. That's hashtag Vandercast. Let's jump in.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Vanderbloemen Leadership Podcast. My name is Milan Ford, your host for today's podcast, and I'm just excited and privileged to interview a leader who I've admired for many years, Kendra Fleming of North Point Community Church, located in Alpharetta, Georgia. Kendra, it's so great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Milan. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for asking me.
No problem. Well, Kendra, I know a large majority of our listeners today have been greatly impacted in some way over the years by the ministry of North Point Community Church, by the dynamic leadership of your pastor, Andy Stanley. But I'd love for us to just begin today by sharing with our podcast audience a little about how you became the director of children's ministry there at North Point.
Well, like any good story, God really just orchestrated my steps. I grew up a preacher's kid. My dad was pastor in Montana, and I went to college at Liberty University and started serving in a church and children's ministry there. And I was there for about 11 years, and a really great volunteer. Her name is Karen Stubbs, lived in Virginia Beach and was one of my great volunteer teammates there. And she moved to Atlanta and started going to North Point just as it was opening and starting. And North Point in the early years was growing rapidly. They were really having a hard time keeping up with all the growth and needed leaders everywhere. And she was really sweet enough to recommend that somebody talk to me. And I had 4 little kids at the time.
Wow.
And a couple of them were just starting in elementary, and 2 of them were still in preschool. I'm sorry, I think my youngest was just the only one still in preschool. And so I kind of worked from home and part-time, and my husband was a policeman and on the SWAT team there in Virginia Beach, and I just didn't really imagine us moving. And I met Reggie Joyner. I don't know if you know him. And so I met with him, and he asked me to fly in. And he's such a great and interesting person. Just through the interview process, I probably interviewed over 3 days with maybe 20 people. They were very thorough. And he just cast such great vision for what they were trying to do at that time at North Point Community Church that even though I went, and I told him before I went, I can't imagine that we would leave Virginia Beach and move to Atlanta area. That had never been a goal of ours. I went back home and told my husband, God's really doing something really incredible there. I think we should pay attention. And God just opened one door after another. At that time, I had never heard really of North Point. I had heard of Andy because of his dad, Dr. Stanley, in those days. So it was, at that time, it doesn't seem like it now because, God always knows. But at that time, it seemed really risky and like a big change my husband and our family was making for this, position. But it really seemed like God was in it. And, of course, I'm so glad that my husband, Gary, and everybody, we were just able to step into that. He was willing to listen to where God was leading us. But that's kind of how I started. And I've been there almost 15 years now.
Well, it's fair to say that risk probably paid off.
Yes.
Now, just to give our audience an idea of just how expansive your role is there at North Point, share with us how many staff members and volunteers are currently, under your direction involved in some aspect of children's ministry there at North Point?
So we now have 6 church locations in our area, and then multiple partnerships all over, the United States and Global X and all of those kind of things. So my role has kind of changed through the years. When I first started, there was only North Point, and I worked with children's ministry at North Point. Now I'm what we call the MPM leader, or the North Point Ministries leader, and I work over the and just really partner and lead over the children's ministries on our local church campuses. So we probably have about, all in with all of our staff, probably 100 to 120 people. But, that's at 6 locations and directors on all those campuses over preschool and elementary, and we have kids stuff as well. So probably around 110 or somewhere around there.
Wow, that's just amazing. I think people need to really, focus in on just how large and expansive just the network of churches there are in North Point in Atlanta that you oversee. And before I get too far along with just some of the focus questions pertaining to what you do there at North Point, children's ministry looks very different, as you can imagine, at any church.
Right. Yeah.
Briefly, Kendra, share just some of more insight on just the ministry environments that are there for children at North Point. People that may have never heard about Wombaland or kids stuff. Tell a little bit about the ministry environments there at North Point and just kind of the ages that you focus in on in each.
Sure. So Wombaland, which Wamba means creator in Swahili. So Wombaland is our preschool environment. It's the land of the creator, and it is for birth through pre-kindergarten. So we take babies when they start at about 6 weeks old and move through those areas. And our Wombaland environment on all of our churches runs probably about 3,500 to 4,000 preschoolers and, spread out on all those churches. And then our Upstreet environment is our elementary age. It's kindergarten through 5th grade. And we probably run about 6,000 to maybe 64,000 somewhere. 6,400 elementary kids. Wow. Spread among our churches. And then kids stuff is our shared environment for elementary kids and their parents. So that's our environment where we're really trying to partner with parents and kind of take this big idea and content that we're teaching our children and put it in the hands of parents so they can really be able to talk to their kids about that and have a much greater influence on their kids' hearts and lives throughout the week. So that's kind of the quick description. All of our environments involve a small group and a large group component. So the large group environment is meant to be creative, engaging, bring truth to life, allow kids to worship, have fun, but really help engage them into the truth of God's word in a way that's appropriate to their age. So it's all different compared to for a 3-year-old than it would be a 5th grader, of course. Right. And then our small group environments are really kind of the heartbeat of who we are. And we really think it's important to put kids in a small group with their group of friends with the same leader for a whole year, because we just know that we can tell the story from the stage and bring it to life the very best we can. But there's not really a leader kind of sitting around a circle who knows that kid and loves him and is helping him, kind of knows where he's at and what he's ready to understand, and helps him kind of get ready to apply that truth that otherwise we're kind of teaching to a big, wide, massive crowd and probably not doing a good job with application, which is really what kids need. So I really love how we do small groups. That's one of my favorite things about our ministry environment. So I don't know, is that a good description?
That's a great way to describe that. In terms of just the large group and the small group environments that you have there at North Point, what are some of those ways, especially when you talk about those one-on-one partnerships with leaders and kids, what are some of the ways that you have seen your teams effective at attracting and retaining volunteers and parents to get involved there on your children's ministry teams?
Yeah, so kind of there's probably a couple of layers to that. One big broad stroke layer is we purposefully set aside time to work on and actively create like what I would call a volunteer culture. I actually just got back from an offsite last night with the directors from every campus where we spent a day and a half just planning our volunteer appreciation for the next year and our volunteer development for the next year. And I mean, all the way down to how many notes should we be writing every week, kind of thing. And
that's awesome.
That kind of thing. So there's a heavy sense of volunteer culture because we want people who come to our churches to kind of think it's the cool in thing to be involved at that level. That if you're not serving somewhere, you're really kind of missing out on the connected inside group relationships of our team. So
very good.
So that is one layer. We do that in all kinds of ways. We do things to foster relationships among volunteers. We try to have a lot of fun. We try to give them fun swag, cool T-shirts whenever we can and things like that. And we try to be really personal, like a lot of handwritten notes or meet me for coffee or, let me pray for you and support you when you're going through things. So I think that's a really big part. I think the second part that is probably equally as important and really helps us get really good people is we give them really important jobs. So we don't just say like, I need you, to do a job that, just anybody could do. We really sit down with them and say, hey, listen, I need you to run this computer and it's a tough job and we're going to get the best person we can to train you. And you're going to be responsible for a huge room of lighting and sound and technical. We give them important jobs and our volunteers know it. Same with a small group leader, he or she knows there are 8 to 10 kids that are looking for them every single week and it's an important job. And, we kind of put the ministry for the lives of those children in the hands of our small group leaders. And if they don't do a good job or they don't show up or they don't really care about it, it's going to really not be good for those kids. So I think that's kind of the second thing. And the way we make it sure they know it's important is we tell lots of stories. You probably know that if you were around North Point very long is every meeting, every gathering, every email, everything we do, we just fill it with story so that they realize that the staff is really here to support you, but you're doing the important work in our eyes. So I think those two things are ways we retain volunteers and attract them. I think people sitting in the audience who drop off their kids, there's something very attractive about our volunteer culture, which has everything to do with the kind of people who are volunteering. I wouldn't say a lot to do with our staff necessarily. And then probably some real practical things. Do you want to talk about practical things?
Absolutely.
Okay. So some real practical things. One big thing we do is what we call strategic service Sunday. And you've probably been there for that, where Andy or any of our lead pastors will work through how we should do that service. It's typically very similar on every campus, but it's basically a big recruiting push. But we really try to talk to our audience from the idea of we need you to do an important job. We don't just need anybody to show up, that you really have this potential to make a difference in the lives of kids and students. And, my youngest daughter is now a senior in high school, and I really can't tell you how impactful her high school small group leaders have been. And they've gone for 4 years to every camp and every mission trip and, every late night event. I don't really know how to thank them for how much extra above and beyond investment they've made in my kid, when I really think about that. And so when we're up on that stage and recruiting, we feel like we're really calling people to kind of get out of the thought of my 9-to-5 job, if they're thinking that way, and how can I contribute to this world and make a difference. And
that's very good.
So anyway, that's one practical way. And there's a whole bunch of other small pushes and different ways we push all throughout the year as well.
Very good. Well, I mean, one of the things that you guys do well, I know, is in terms of just not just shoring up a large committed volunteer base, but really do a good job of just overall assessing, the overall health and success of the children's ministry there. What are a few things practically that you can share with our audience that are just some of those key metrics, Kendra, the things that you look at every week, every month, just to know that things are moving along well, particularly with the kids that you serve?
Okay. So some real practical things. I wouldn't say we're overly worried about numbers, but we monitor numbers for health reasons. So we watch and monitor how many children we have who are in our small groups. If those numbers started declining rapidly or significantly, that would mean something to us, right? That's something that's something we were trying to accomplish wasn't happening. So we watch that for sure. We watch how many guests we have. One thing I haven't talked very much about yet is that we exist to invest and invite in our community, and we want new people coming through our doors, people who don't know Jesus and don't have a relationship with their Heavenly Father. So we keep track of our numbers of guests, and to us, if guest numbers started declining, that would mean we're not doing something that we feel like we should be doing. We pay attention. We have a class called Jumpstart. I don't know if you ever participated in that with your family at all, but it's when children are starting to ask questions about salvation and baptism. And so they come into a presentation that is a really clear presentation that kids go through with their parents, where we present the salvation message and begin to explain to them what baptism means. And so we definitely keep track of, how many kids are going through that and how many kids are getting baptized, because it does tell us something. We monitor size of small groups. If our groups are getting too big and we're not getting enough leaders to keep them at a good size, we kind of think 8 to 10 kids in a small group for elementary is a healthy size. And if we see that getting too big, getting in that 12, 15 or more range, we know that the healthiest dynamics can't be happening there, because a leader can't pour into that many kids or manage them very well sometimes. We really gauge our health by stories, and we have systems for asking for those stories and collecting them. And so we purposefully do a lot of surveying too. We do a lot of surveying with our parents and our kids. We use a Kid Stuff Takeout, which is a kind of a what's the right word? It's an event or a planned activity we send home with parents to get them talking about the big idea and make it kind of fun for them at home. And so we do surveys with our parents all the time and say, like, how effective was that? Have you been able to use it? Tell us, stuff like that. We monitor social media interaction. That tells us something. Not everybody's on social media, but if that goes down or we're not getting a lot of good communication there, we probably would pay attention to that too.
Very good. Very good. One of the things, Kendra, I've definitely wanted to ask you, you spoke a little bit about kind of the ratios you also watch in terms of how many kids are in a small group in contrast to the leader leading them. But, we're asked by a number of churches that we work with, how many staff or volunteers should we have in our children's ministry? What should we be doing in terms of recruitment for this classroom size or this ministry? But I'm particularly interested in just maybe how you assess when it's time to add someone on staff for the team. Is there a number in your mind that says, we're getting thin in this area, or is this something you just kind of assess year round in terms of programs, campuses, or locations? I mean, how would you answer that?
Sure, yeah. So we basically we have kind of two pillars, I guess, in our staff matrix. We have what we would call a group side. So we hire small group directors, and then we have a production side. So we hire production directors.
Now, I want to pause right there. You have small group directors just for children's ministry.
Yes, we do. So they just oversee teams of coaches and small group leaders and children in small groups.
Wow. And
so those groups directors are hired, and that number is who we hire is driven directly by the number of children we have in small groups. So whether that's a part-time or a full-time position is really driven by pure numbers. So, and the numbers are a little different in Wambaland than they are in Upstreet, because we have more volunteers in Wombaland, because in Wombaland we have like a 1-to-4 ratio in our babies area, 1-to-5, really even 1-to-3 sometimes in the babies area. We have a 1-to-5 ratio. As they get into pre-K and kindergarten, can go up to 1-to-6. So it's not really till we get to elementary where our volunteer numbers start going 1-to-8, 1-to-10, 1-to-12.
Okay.
So we typically base it off of the number of volunteers we have, which directly correlates, for us to the number of children we have. And then every group of small groups, let me just talk about elementary. That's probably the clearest one. So if there's 8 to 10 kids and they have a small group leader, and then for every 8 to 10, even up to 12 small group leaders, there's another volunteer position called a coach, which I highly recommend because that will help you not have to hire as many staff.
Very good.
And then really for about every 8 coaches, which, if you kind of do the math, represents 100 to 150 or more children, right in, that range. In Wombaland, maybe more like 150 to 180 in Upstreet. Then we would hire a full-time groups director.
Got it.
And, it would be a part-time person if they were half that, kind of thing.
Okay.
And then so that's the ratio there. Then our production directors are really hired kind of based on overall size. So if we're starting something new, like we did at Gwinnett Church, I don't know if you're familiar with that new location. So when we were first starting, we had only one large group environment, one service in the evening. And we always hire the director of the environment first. So we hired the Upstreet director first. And then we look at that, his or her skill set. And he or she, when we're small, becomes either the groups director or the production director, depending on where their strengths lie. So, for instance, at Gwinnett, Sarah was stronger in groups. So she, for a season, was the groups director. And we hired a very, very part-time contract person to oversee large group environment. Then as they grew and they got multiple large group environments, and we've now moved into a new building and multiple services, we've now hired a full-time. So they have 3 large group environments at 2 services. So there is, Gwinnett has 2 large group environments at 2 services. So 4 to manage, 4 teams of volunteers. So there's now 1 full-time production director, and she has 1 full-time groups director underneath her. So that just kind of gives you an idea. And she runs about 350 kids, maybe sometimes closer to 450. She kind of fluctuates there. Yeah.
Yeah, I know if anyone is like me listening, my head is spinning with all the numbers that you have to manage,
Yeah, sorry.
Here at Vanderbloemen, Kendra, we support hundreds of churches every year, various staffing needs that they have. And, the one thing that I would say in a lot of our searches that has made children's ministry pastor searches challenging is just finding what those key characteristics are that we should be looking for, or even telling churches that they should be looking for when making their next children's ministry pastor hire. If you were in that seat, what are those characteristics that you're looking for in a new hire? A church now or a ministry environment has got to that 180, 300 mark, and now it's time to make that hire. What are just 3 characteristics that you look for to make sure that this person's going to be a great fit for your team?
Well, you always have to take in consideration the rest of the team, right? So sometimes we look for a little bit different things here and there depending on who the rest of the team. But if I'm hiring a director for our Upstreet, let's say our elementary environment at one of our locations, I'm definitely looking for someone who can cast vision well, who is able to kind of step back from it all and cast vision for the bigger reason why we're all here and why it matters, and tell people why we should be, gathered to do what we're doing today and all of those kind of things. Because I feel like volunteers will show up for sure to do a job for a short term, but they will connect to a vision and a purpose for a much longer period of time. And they're much more attracted, to giving their life to something that really, really matters. And so volunteerism is a huge part of a job when you're the director. And so somebody who can cast vision well, I think is important.
That's very good.
I would probably say, did you say I only get 3?
Yeah, 3 for now. I mean, we're definitely going to leave your information at the end of this podcast because you are a wealth of information for children's ministry pastors.
Well, thank you. Excuse me. I would probably, it's hard for me to just pick, but I would probably pick someone who is highly responsible. And the reason that I say that is usually someone who is highly responsible has a personal sense of ownership.
That's good.
And the reason that you need someone like that is it's a rare lead pastor who has the bandwidth, or it should even be his job to really know in a detailed way what's happening in children's ministry. He should know at a high level, he or she, but he doesn't need, nor can he really engage at that level. And you need your children's leader to be highly responsible and have a personal sense of ownership no matter who is looking over their shoulder or not. And the reason for that, the obvious reason is we're so responsible for children's safety. Like,
right.
When kids come in our buildings, the people who take care of them, they have to be safe people. The ideas we have that might be a fun game has to be safe. The food we give them has to be safe. So, nothing will ruin a church faster than somebody who hurts a child in any way. So a children's director, there are so many details and systems that must be followed for all of that to happen well, that in and of herself or himself, they have to really personally own and be responsible, because like I said, the greater staff of the church won't ever really understand the level of what it takes to do those kind of jobs well.
That's right.
And, so I would look for that. I would look for someone I just really trusted to be responsible, whether I was there or not, that it was in them personally. I guess probably the last thing I would say, is, there's so much about leadership, but I probably would break it out separately and say really good people skills. Somebody who is able to, really have that pastoral side and be a good listener,
right.
Be good at leading people to change. We're always changing things in church and ministry, and good people skills really matter. Sometimes I'll meet someone who's just a little too abrupt or a little too blunt, and not that they can't fix that or work on that. I can tend to be that way a little bit too, and I get kind of in my leadership mode. But really good people skills, because the people and the parents and everyone who's serving and attending with us, they don't have to be there. They're choosing to be there. And when they interact with us, they should like us.
That's
you
good.
know what I mean?
That's very good.
They should like us, and they should want to be around us, and we should be kind and patient and good listeners. And even if we have to say something that's difficult, we should be able to do that well. So those are probably 3 of the top things I would really look for.
Oh, those are excellent. Those are excellent. So, Kendra, switching gears, I'm going to ask you a few questions now that we normally ask all of our podcast guests, kind of a lightning round of topics that many of our listeners tend to want to hear answers for. So here's the first, very quickly. What is one book that you've been reading that's either helped you in your own walk with God or maybe pertaining to leadership? And just so you know, the Bible and Good to Great have already been taken.
Okay. I just probably a couple weeks ago finished The Power of Habit. I don't know if you've read that. That's a really
Great
good book.
book.
And it really kind of goes around the fact that there are habits in an organization that produce outcomes, and you should be aware of what those habits are and what should you do when you need to change a habit. So I thought that was a great book. I just finished that not too long ago.
Awesome. Okay, the next one. What is one app on your phone? It could be an old one or one you recently downloaded that you've come to really enjoy.
Well, I'm on Instagram almost every day. I use Buffer a lot too. If you're asking apps that I use every day or enjoy, I use my phone almost exclusively over my computer. So I'd probably say if you make me pick one, Instagram is my one I'm using a lot right now, enjoying.
That's awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
And now share with us, if you can, just one embarrassing ministry story. I'm sure you've had many over the years that our listeners can absolutely relate to. Just something maybe terribly went wrong in kid stuff or Wombaland, something that you oversee there at North Point, that you look back and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened.
Yeah. Well, I can't. it was embarrassing, but it probably wasn't as public as maybe you're thinking, but I fixed it up really fast. I'll tell you
that's
that.
Good.
Several years ago, we did promotion, which means, several thousand kids all go on one Sunday to a completely new room, new location in our buildings. Yeah. And meet new leaders. And, so I completely underestimated and did not lead my team well or prepare for the transition of moving several hundred children that were in pre-K in Wombaland to our kindergarten environment in 1 week. And just I really underestimated how parents would feel with their kids first going to kindergarten and how crowded that would be. And it really changes from a classroom that's kind of smaller to a large room with small groups all over the room. And then they go to kids stuff. And so on that particular day, the lines were crazy out the door. Children were crying in the lines. They were scared to go. When they got in kids stuff, kids got lost from their parents and kids stuff because they just weren't used to that environment. And parents, oh my gosh, I never had so many upset parents
I can imagine.
With me on that day. And at one moment I was standing next to Rick Holiday, who's our administrator. He's on the management team for North Point Ministries. And a parent was letting me have it, and the children were crying. And he just looked at me. I said, "Don't you worry. We will fix this." And we did.
That's good.
That's
awesome.
One that just sticks out. That it was embarrassing and it was not fun.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, the final question I have for you, Kendra, is, we have hundreds of children's ministry pastors who may listen to this podcast who seem to be fixing things almost every week. And, sometimes have been frustrated with either a lack of resources, maybe volunteers, or sometimes just a lack of appreciation within their own church.
Sure.
What are some final words of encouragement that you'd love to share with them who are listening?
Well, one big thing I would say is whenever you serve in ministry, you've got to kind of step out of really caring about what your pastor or anybody thinks at your very core level, and really embrace what you were called to do.
Very good.
You have to have like your own personal meaning and motivation and calling from your Heavenly Father. And the way that I connect to that most is when I'm really one-on-one with children or with parents, and I realize like in this moment, He's using me in the life of this family or these children. I occasionally take mission trips and go to other countries where people are very under-resourced, and yet they are making a difference every single moment of every single day. And so for what I guess what I would tell other people is like, hey, listen, if you're discouraged and your pastor or your team doesn't realize maybe how hard you're working and all that, you probably need to just step back from it all and remember who you're doing this for and why you're doing it. And
very good.
Just get your motivation from your Heavenly Father, because nobody will really understand what it takes, I don't think, to truly do the work of children's ministry except for people who do it. It is a very different animal than any other job in our churches, but it is so, so important. And so anyway, I think that's what I would tell them.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Kendra, for sharing your heart and wisdom with us today. I mean, I could be talking to you forever about, just what you've done and what you continue to do there at North Point. I can speak for just our entire team here at Vanderbloemen, how thankful we are for just the work you do and just the entire North Point Community Church and how they advance the kingdom. If any of our podcaster listeners want to follow Kendra, where can they follow you on Twitter, Kendra?
You can follow me at Kendra Fleming or at K Fleming. I'm actually at both of them.
Okay, great. And for more information about North Point, you can log on to northpoint.org. Is that right, Kendra?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And find out more information about Wombaland, inside stuff, kids stuff, and all the just wonderful ministry environments that Kendra and her team make possible. So thank you for having us in your time today, Kendra, and podcasters. We thank you for listening today.
Yeah,
God bless.
Thank you. It was great talking. See you later.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. Visit vandercast.com for notes on today's show. See you next time.